Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
This week's National Interest takes off from the events in Bangladesh and the light it throws on India's challenges in its immediate neighborhood. And when you finish watching this, I would also request you to check out your subscription. If you made a subscription already, if you haven't made one, please make one now. If you made one, please top it up. The more money that comes to you, the more goes into our coverage, which is very important. Good journalism is very good, very useful, and very vital for a democracy, as is becoming more and more evident by the day. That said, once you've done so, and also if you're a subscriber, please do check out how does your subscription work. So log in and please do see if the promise that I made to you about 2 weeks back, that our subscribers will now get a mostly ad-free, a very ad-light experience. I know many of you keep complaining that there are too many ads, particularly too many video ads. You will find that those are not there. You should find that those are not there. But if you still do, please kick me in the shins and I will have it fixed. I will be looking at your responses. That said, I am back to India's immediate neighborhood policy challenges. The dramatic events in Bangladesh bring the focus back onto India's neighborhood and the Modi government's record in dealing with it. To take a deeper look at what's immediate, we need to begin a quarter century ago. In fact, to 1999 exactly. This is when Atal Bihari Vajpayee made his big move with Pakistan by taking the bus ride to Lahore. You can choose your friends, he said, but you can't choose your neighbors. So once you've got the neighbors that you've got, it's imperative that you keep trying to improve ties with them. In 2008, Dr. Manmohan Singh took it a step forward with his call for neighborhood first. In 2014 then, Narendra Modi also put his stamp on it with his characteristic style, inviting all the leaders in the extended subcontinent for his swearing in, his first swearing in. He followed it up with visits to the neighbors, mostly held in a mood of resurgent euphoria and in one case with an extraordinary sense of drama, again so characteristic of his style. This when he surprised all by breaking journey in Lahore to greet then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif on his granddaughter's wedding. There was hope now if India's first leader with the majority in 25 years was showing such commitment to improving relationships in the region of 7 sovereign nations with multiple divides and tectonic faults, some caused by ideology as India-Pakistan, all deepened and widened by history as well. Some also had Cold War era debris cluttering them. It was a formidable challenge to repair and clean these breaches and build bridges over them. As Modi's third successive term gets underway, how does this score sheet look? Bangladesh is the biggest crisis. For 15 years now, Dhaka had been India's closest ally. It helped that it was under the same leader who kept on getting stronger and stronger with time, unless there was no power left with her and she had to find refuge in India. The pivot to a secure northeast for India is located in Dhaka, especially with nobody ever knowing where the center of gravity in always turbulent, always unstable Myanmar is. Pakistan saw dramatic changes. Meanwhile, Nawaz Sharif was thrown out. He came back. Imran Khan came in, was thrown out, was sent to jail. The new regime, Imran regime, almost fully broke off with India after the 5th August 2019 changes in the Jammu and Kashmir constitutional status. Nepal, meanwhile, ratcheted up distrust to a level where it changed its national maps to incorporate large territories strategically important to India, through which ran also a pilgrim route to Kailash Mansarovar to its own map, as always happens with competitive and prickly nationalisms, which is so familiar in our region. The map also got unanimous endorsement in Nepal's parliament. Sri Lanka also had its own version of color or Maidan revolution following an economic meltdown, as well as the Chinese acquisition of its prime port at Hambantota because Sri Lankans just could not repay their debt. The rise of Mohammad Muizzu in Maldives on an India out campaign is a more recent story. Bhutan is under intense pressure from the Chinese to settle its borders, ideally on the basis of never mind India's interests. That's a continuing pressure point as well on Bhutan as well as for India. Is this dramatic turnaround for the worse entirely India's fault? Or is India a victim? Can India claim to be a victim? How can India claim to victimhood when it is such a dominant force in the subcontinents? Its GDP today is 4 times that of the rest of the region put together. Its population, India's population, is 3 times, and its global power multiple times compared to the rest of the region put together. So India can't claim to be the victim. Victimhood is not for India. India's people have also earned for their republic that unique quality in this neighborhood, a stable constitutional democracy where every transition of government has taken place peacefully, democratically, and credibly. That is saying a lot in such a volatile region where almost no transition takes place peacefully, definitely not in Pakistan, only once in Bangladesh, and others have their troubles as well. That's why junk that idea of victimhood for India. Ours is among the most unstable neighborhoods in the world. Most neighbors are highly populous, most of India's neighbors, with crowded cities, youthful, they have very young populations, and have tasted democracy unlike messy regions in Africa. They might look more violent, but most of them have not tasted democracy. The combination of a large, young, aspirational population with a taste for democracy means that difficult thing called public opinion really matters. And that makes choices for the rulers in these countries as well as for India very, very limited. To that extent, public opinion, the presence of public opinion as a factor limits those choices. In the immediate context, that's what Hasina and India as her friend overlooked in Bangladesh. These are not nations where a dictator, however powerful, can do things that public doesn't like. Remember the problems that Musharraf had in Pakistan in trying to deliver what his stalwart allies, the Americans, wanted in their war on terror, and also the promises he had been making to the Indian side, moving towards a settlement with Dr. Manmohan Singh. Remember the opposition he faced? He might have been a dictator, but public opinion still mattered. He was not able to override it. And finally, because he kept on trying to do it, he lost power. Each of our neighbors, each country in our neighborhood is a much more imperfect democracy than like ours. Ours is not perfect. No democracy is perfect, but each one in these countries is much more imperfect than ours. But none is a perfect dictatorship either. In all of these countries, you deal with both the regime, therefore, and public opinion. So if you become unpopular with the public, it becomes that much difficult for the regime to work with you. Or maybe the regime will lose power, as happened in Bangladesh. That public opinion also understands and values sovereignty. If India is seen as hectoring, interfering, it causes a dreadful immune reaction. We've seen this in Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. That 2015 Nepal blockade is an awful scar there. And think of Sri Lankans, they must have been thrown back and wondering what sanctity there is to solemn sovereign agreements if these can be reopened almost 50 years later in an election campaign. My reference is to the Prime Minister bringing in the Kachathivu issue in the latest Lok Sabha election campaign when he was campaigning in Tamil Nadu. The fact is, South Bloc is mindful of this and mostly correct in what it says and diplomatic. But what is said in the media, seen as friendly to the government, which is most of our news TV channels, particularly the Hindi channels, most of that is tracked closely in the neighborhood as well. This is worsened exponentially by ultra-nationalist social media handles as well. Because It's very difficult to tell your neighbors that, look, these are individuals, these are anonymous handles. They know who follows whom. They say, no, but your key leaders follow these handles. These handles are saying this. So this must have your official endorsement. And that is how it plays into public opinion in these countries, neighboring countries, and toxifies it. These handles, many of these handles put out threads of revisionist, often non-factual or fictional history of India's ties with its neighbors and their territories. Some recommend sending the army into Bangladesh, opening the borders for Hindus. There are, by the way, 14 million, 1.4 crores of them, and creating an enclave for them in Rangpur. Rangpur is in Bangladesh. So seize that territory from Rangpur and create an enclave. Now you might say these are just some Twitter handles, but think about the impact this has in Bangladesh, because sovereignty is a very important issue for every country. On the day External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar ended his visit to Maldives, which was meant mostly to pour oil over troubled waters, which he had done quite successfully, the canard that Malé had handed over 28 islands to India spread. It made it to what passes off a primetime debates on some TV channels, Hindi TV channels. Somebody even said, Muizu ne ghutne tek diye. Muizu has gone down on its knees. We can toss it as a joke, but Maldivians won't. A country with about 500,000 people, about 5.5 lakhs, and a 7 billion GDP has one blessing in the same measure, in equal measure, to a rising behemoth like India. It's called sovereignty. The South Bloc moved in, had these tweets deleted, called out people and said, don't do it. But by this time, the damage was done. It's all right. It's for the better that they did it, but it was a little bit late. The damage was done. Put yourself in the chappals of a neighbor who's watching this discourse from India. All they hear about Indian policies is muscular, muscular, muscular. Muscularity is great, but what about those other attributes? Cerebral, cultural, scientific, intellectual. A nation with the humility to be a teacher to the region. If on the way to becoming the Vishwa Guru, as Swami Vivekanand had imagined in his storied Chicago address. Are our academic institutions good enough to attract some of the, at least a fraction of the lakhs of students from our neighbors who go overseas for education? Do we even want them in our institutions? What about a shower of scholarships, internships, cultural performances, and movies instead of hyper-nationalist media insults? As the sole superpowers record tells us, sole superpower means America. As that record tells you, soft power is not an adjunct to hard power, it's critical to hard power. Does India have think tanks to house dozens of scholars from the neighboring countries, invite them to conferences, run its own track two processes? I know, one odd does it outside the government, but not enough. It isn't as if India doesn't know it. At a higher level, India knows it, acknowledges it, and acts accordingly. That's why we buy power from Nepal and Bhutan but export to Bangladesh. These are vital economic linkages and stakes. Forget Adani. Adani is not the issue. You have to ask the question, is India short of power that it's importing from Nepal and Bhutan? Or does India have surplus power that it's selling to Bangladesh? India as a large country is looking at what is in a neighbor's interest. Bangladesh needs power, it's short of power. Nepal and Bhutan have surplus power, so they need the money. And that's how this diplomacy is run. At the higher level, policymakers understand this. But then they lose out in detail, and also when they get overwhelmed by the compulsions of domestic politics. The other side of the coin also is the overplaying of the Hindu card. The Prime Minister's visits to Nepal and Bangladesh at temple visits as highlights. The larger reality, however, is that along our longest borders, we face large Muslim majorities. They look at us askance when we ask them to treat their minorities fairly. It is a case of disastrously perfect timing that just when Bangladesh is on the boil and our diplomacy is engaged in damage control, Assam last Thursday presented its first CAA citizenship to a Hindu from Bangladesh. Where else? For 5 years now, and especially since the war in Ukraine began, India has been talking of multipolarity, strategic autonomy, and multi-alignment. Good ideas, but these are available to our neighbors as well, especially with the Chinese shadow much bigger than ours. They can all play. all our neighbors can play China against us, as we might play, however bashfully and clumsily, the US card against China. The subcontinent is not our strategic preserve. Even the mighty Americans have failed to subdue Cuba just next door, where they also have a foothold, and Venezuela, which isn't far away. The fundamental construct of India's neighborhood policy still needs to be what Vajpayee postulated, Manmohan Singh embraced, and Modi energized. It's just that we need to junk domestic politics away from our neighborhood policy and excessive religiosity too, while acquiring much humility and a renewed respectfulness towards our neighbors.